Hello, everyone. Just giving everybody a couple minutes to know that we're here and we're existing. Hope everybody's having a wonderful Tuesday. Looking forward to talking about this topic because I know it is a popular point of discussion for RPG players. How's everybody's Tuesday? How's everybody doing? Hope everyone's well. Hey, Claude, how's it going? Yeah, this is the only kind of jog I anticipate I will ever go on, at least for the foreseeable future. All right, let me pull my face out. How's everyone doing today? Welcome to Joy of Gamemastering with Alex Thomas. I'm your host, Alex Thomas, where we break down the things that can get in the way of having a great time as a game master. We are here to help demystify, to help improve your time running games, your favorite TTRPGs, whether that is Mutants and Masterminds, my favorite, D&D, Pathfinder, Call of Cthulhu, whatever kind of game you're into running, I am here to help you sort of cross the barrier between do I want to be a game master and forever GM. Thank you for joining me as I am recovering from my time over in Gen Con this week. It was a wonderful convention. I had a great time running 6 games for a bunch of different players, working in the Green Ronin booth, and seeing lots of people that I was excited to spend some time with. It was a great time. So, for today's topic on the Joy of Gamemastering, we are talking about one of RPG's biggest buzzwords, railroading. Now, most people, when they think of railroading, they think of robbing all of the players of their agency and ensuring that there will not be any choices to be made from a player perspective. This is the game master has put you in a train car or in a mine cart, and you are being whisked down the road as they are telling you their story, with no room for deviation, no room for subtlety, no room for player agency. That is the kind of railroading that is bad, but I do think that railroading as a concept is a little blown out of proportion compared to the vitriol it inspires with other players throughout the industry. At the end of the day, we are playing a game together, and we are trying to tell a group story. So player agency is important, but player participation in the story is also important. So let's just go ahead and break down the definition of railroading and talk about a little bit about what people's reactions to it are. Hey, Duke, good to see you. So let's just Google a handy dandy railroading RPG definition. See if they have anything. Oh, there's an RPG museum. Here we go. So, railroading, according to the RPG Museum Wiki, is a GMing style in which no matter what the PCs do, they will experience certain events according to the GM's plan. In general, this is considered a flaw, displaying a lack of flexibility, naturalness of the scenario, and a lack of respect for meaningful choices by the players. That's all bad. So, and when it is used to completely restrict and to completely shut down everything your players are trying to do, that is when people get very frustrated. Yeah, Duke says, I see good railroading more as gently guiding players where they should go, at best giving them taste a little morsel so they never knew they were doing what you hoped. Yeah, and that is the trouble with creating a role-playing game, is that every time we write an adventure, we have a scenario in mind. We have come up with an idea. Okay, our heroes are going to go to this dungeon and defeat these monsters, and that's going to be the story. Where we run into trouble is when the players say, actually, we don't want to go to that dungeon, we want to go over here. And when they go over there, that is when the problem comes up. Tempo is asking, is the topic Mutants and Masterminds or the age system? The topic is game mastering in general. Railroading is a universal concept for game masters to have to grapple with, and for players to have to grapple with, and we're going to help with both of those. So, yeah, the problem with railroading is that it constrains player choices, and it makes it seem like they have no say in what's going to happen. So that is the problem we want to try to avoid with running the game. And part of that can be done up front by expressing to your players, hey, this is a story-based game rather than a sandbox game. Sandbox games, railroading is a much dirtier term. Because the idea of a sandbox is that you drop them into the middle of an environment and let the players go wherever they want to go, and it's up to you to adjudicate what happens. There is an element in dealing with railroading as a GM where you have to be willing to improvise, you have to be willing to roll with the punches, and you have to be able to do a little bit of I call it the cup game. Other people call it the quantum ogre. The quantum ogre being no matter what direction the players go, they run into the same thing. When it's done that way, that can be that again can sort of flaunt in the face of the players that you have no choice. We're going to do whatever I want to do. You can do the cup game or the quantum ogre in such a way that it still feels like they're making choices by making sure whatever you're moving fits the environment they're going into. So say you present the players with choice A, choice B, and they decide to go choice B, but all you have ready is choice A. It's up to you at that point to take what is in choice A and to recontextualize it, reflavor it as something that makes sense being in the location of choice B. You can keep the stats the same for the most part. But make sure when they get there, it doesn't feel like, oh, that makes more sense down that path rather than this path. Duke says, but games where everyone knows that there's a rough plot, everybody should be on board being led through it. Yes, that's especially true for one-shots. One-shots have a lot of, not necessarily railroading involved, but there's an agreement that we have 4 hours to do this, and this is the story we signed up to do. Please keep pushing in the same direction as me. Temporary mentions Monastir is a Polish RPG that encourages the game master to constantly railroad the players, along with pigeonholing them as crusty old nobles and not allowing any other types of characters. That sounds awesome. I'd be interested in checking that out. That sounds like it's engaging with the idea of railroading in a satirical way, which I really enjoy. But yeah, so finding ways, say you give the players the choice of, okay, so the adventure path branches off in two ways. You can decide if you want to go directly to the city where the peril is happening, or you can decide to try and cut off the evil army's advance by taking this path. The Quantum Ogre method would say, okay, if you go the way of the army, you'll wind up fighting the army. If you go the way to the city, you'll still wind up fighting the army. What you want to do in that situation is make sure that there is some sort of time-based reward for choosing one or the other. If they go to the city, they should have an opportunity to do something to improve the defenses of the city for the army that's coming forth. Or they should be able to do something to help evacuate the city before the army shows up. If they go to fight the army first, perhaps they catch the army out, unawares. They're in the middle of camping out for the night, and they have an encounter in the evening where they get the chance to try to sneak in and take out some of the leadership. They get the chance to try and sabotage their supply lines. Something like that, where there is a natural benefit to choosing one path or the other. Ultimately, the combat encounter is probably very similar. You're still probably fighting the same stat blocks, the same officers, all that fun stuff, but the circumstances have changed. Those are the things that you want to build into your prep to make sure that no matter what direction the players dip towards, you have some sort of setting material that makes sense for the environment that they're in, to avoid being accused of something like railroading or something like employing the quantum ogre. I keep mentioning the quantum ogre, so I guess I should probably define that as well. So the quantum ogre is a term for an obstacle that the GM plans ahead of time and throws in the player's path whichever way they go. So, for example, using an ogre as the example, say the players wind up at a crossroads. Path on the left leads down into a valley directly towards the castle that they're trying to get to. The path on the right goes up to a sort of mountainous peak that snakes behind the castle. The players debate, okay, do we want to go down into the valley because that seems a little lighter, a little safer, or do we want to try to go up into the mountains because that seems like a quicker way around and could possibly lead to a secret entrance behind the castle? And no matter what, the GM says, okay, when you get there, you fight an ogre. And if the players ask, well, what would happen if we gone the other way? And you say, you would have fought an ogre also. That's when the players are like, okay, so it didn't really matter what way we went, because we still wound up in the same encounter and we didn't gain a benefit either way. It's the benefit either way that's where the real agency comes in. So coming up with, no matter what path they take, there is some sort of benefit, a reward for the players making a decision. Now, railroading is also something that can come up from a player perspective. If they say, hey, you're railroading me because they, instead of taking like path down into the valley or path up into the mountains, they're like, actually, we're going to go form a bake shop in the village 700 miles away instead. Actually, that's the adventure we want to do. We're going to go and we're going to go pay our taxes, or we're going to go to the BMV, or we're going to completely avoid your adventure no matter what you put in front of us. You know, that part of this requires buy-in from the players, suspension of disbelief, because you are presenting them with a scenario. If they decide to completely jettison that scenario, a conversation needs to be had. They're either letting you know that they're not interested in the type of game that you're running, in which case talk to them, say, hey, what about the situations I'm putting in front of you is not appealing to you as a player? Mark Spinal says, if you're playing on Call of Cthulhu's Hori on the Orient Express, which takes place on a train, is that considered railroading? Sorry, I couldn't make you resisting the bad RPG joke. It could be. If I think Orient Horror on the Orient Express, I think looking at it as you're definitely traveling to one direction, but if you present the mystery to them, and no matter what they decide, you have exactly one clue, and if they don't find it, they're screwed, or you have 100% zeroed in that this person is responsible for the problem, no matter what the players bring to me as could be a possibly better scenario, then you could be getting into the bad railroading as opposed to just the geographical railroading. But yeah, everybody should be working together. Everybody should be pushing in the same direction. That's the important thing to avoid the feeling of bad railroading. Because a lot of times an RPG is a linear design. Some games like to do sandboxes, in which case you shouldn't run into a lot of railroading, but you're going to put a lot more prep on yourself as the game master, getting ready for all of the possible, all of the possible paths the players might take through the sandbox. And even then, you might run into some railroading, say, in the sandbox by having a bound area that the players are allowed to adventure in. The easiest way to do a sandbox is to make sure that there is only so many places in the sandbox that are available to explore. I think Curse of Strahd does a wonderful job with this because Barovia is actually trapped in a pocket dimension, so there's literally only so many places you can go. And as the GM, you can prepare those places as necessary. I would say with a sandbox, to help avoid some of that railroading, you want to do very high concept prep for every area the players might go to in the immediate future, while doing some more specific prep in areas that you think they're going to be interested in going initially. That way, if they do decide to go to another place that is within travel distance for the one adventure that the adventure time that you have allotted, you can still improvise using the high level prep that you've done. Versus if they go the way that you think they're going to go, then the adventure might be a little more satisfying because you've had time to come up with genuine puzzles, genuine interesting encounters, all that fun stuff. Gene Carone asks, how would you make the villains fit in railroading? Do you mean the antagonists of the story, or if the player characters are villains? Because the interesting thing about villains, especially in a superhero game, I run a lot of superhero games, so I've got a lot of experience with that. When you run into a villain in terms of railroading, they're often the ones driving the plot anyway. So it comes down to the three things that I always ask myself when I'm designing a villain for a scenario. What is the villain's motivation? So what do they want? What is their goal? What exact thing are they trying to accomplish with the mission at hand? The second thing is, what do they want to pay for that thing? So what is their ideal scenario? What would happen if the player characters never showed up? And three, what are they willing to sacrifice for that thing? So where's the point where they are going to cut and run from the caper instead of sticking it through? Are they willing to die for this cause? Are they willing to sacrifice all of their minions for this cause? Are they willing to blow up the city in exchange for this cause? Knowing those three things gives you the chance to basically role play the villain in the situation. The cool thing about having an active villain in a story is that you have the ability to react to the players the same way the players are reacting to what you're doing. And it's a back and forth dynamic. Again, in a sandbox situation, you want to make sure these are the places that the villain, you want to basically build a timeline for what the villain is up to. And if that timeline intersects with what the players are doing, they'll run into each other. And then you run into the situation where I've got this big villain. What happens if the players knock him out? And there are some games that have ways to accommodate that. There are things like Mutants and Masterminds hero points, where the GM can give the group a hero point and make something bad happen for the heroes. It can be as easy as, okay, the villain is about to be defeated, and the villain points and says, you can stop me, or you can save those people. Or if you get in my way, something bad will happen to the people you care about. Or, if I'm killed, a bomb will go off somewhere nearby. Something like that. Yeah, but villains as player characters, you're going to run into a lot more. The players are making those choices. What do they want? What are they willing to pay for things? And what are the consequences of the interference by the antagonist? Whether that is a team of superheroes trying to stop them, a local team of adventurers who has come to prevent the kobold party from stealing the mayor's daughter, or whatever your player characters are up to. Duke says, I think it's a matter of measure. No railroading whatsoever could be very chaotic, whereas total railroad is basically reading a book to your players. It should be in the sweet spot between. Yeah, just like any GM tool, it is best if used in moderation and with intention. You never want to be reading your book to your players unless you're at a public reading at a library, in which case, yeah, do that. But if you're all sitting down at a role-playing game, they should have an opportunity to impact what's happening. And I think that's a mental load from a GM perspective that you want to look into is, am I presenting this as a story that I desperately want to tell, or am I presenting an interesting situation and I want to see how it plays out when the chaos element of the players gets involved? Tempo says, sessions with a structured plot and steps might need railroading unless the game master is willing to change the campaign to accommodate the choices that players make. Yes. Having a structured plot, having a linear idea of what's going to happen, that's where railroading really comes up as a potential problem. I've been talking about sandboxes, but when you're in a linear story, again, it's important to make timelines. It's important to make sort of notes about how the pieces are moving on the board. A lot of linear stories are things like a dungeon crawl, or things like a closed room mystery, or things like a one-shot. In those instances, you want to make and you want to tell the players, hey, this is a one-shot. Please go with me when I present a clue to you, or please be willing to, follow along. I had a perfect example of this at Gen Con this week, where I was running my Legends of Tomorrow game, which is theoretically about the Legends going to an Elvis impersonator contest in the 80s to try to track down a time-displaced Elvis. I've run this game like 6 times now, And 5 of the times, they've asked me at the beginning, did Elvis still die in this timeline? And when I say yes, they're like, cool, good enough. We're going to go to the 80s. The group at Gen Con were like, we don't believe you. We want to see a body. And at that point, as the GM, I was locked into whatever they were doing, because I couldn't just tell them, you find a body, nothing happened. Because in the adventure notes that I've written for what happened, the day Elvis was meant to die, he was taken by the antagonist of this adventure and moved into the time stream. Well, my heroes basically staked out Elvis's last day on Earth, so I had to say, okay, at some point, Elvis gets grabbed, and the whole adventure suddenly became the Legends of Tomorrow and the backstory of the adventure I wanted to write. Which is, I mean, I had prepared the backstory. I knew what was meant to happen that led to the events of the adventure I was going to be running, but this was a completely different experience than the other 5 times I'd ran it, because they didn't go to the Elvis impersonator contest. They went to space to go get the aliens who kidnapped Elvis, and I was willing to roll with the punches on that and move some of the encounters around and be willing to say, okay, if I don't go on this path with them, and they find out that Elvis was taken on the day he died, they will know that I railroaded them into the story I wanted to tell. Which, you know, I could have. I gave them a couple of instances where I was like, hey, Elvis is, you know, there is a body. There was a cover-up involved. You guys find out that Stanley Kubrick helped stage the death and the moving of the corpse and all that stuff. But I felt like that wouldn't be satisfying to them as players in this event. So I decided to allow them to follow the chain of investigation. Even though it was a one-shot, even though that wasn't the plan I had. Tempo says, Apocalypse World and Blades in the Dark usually don't need railroading because the story flows from the player's actions and behavior along with the consequences. I believe that almost every RPG should work that way. They should stem from... I always advise game masters, set up a really good first scene in a hook, and then let the players do what players do and follow them. You know, they will present to you with, this is what we want to do, and then you have the opportunity at that point to follow along and to basically do all the things that they're asking to do. And then you react and they react and you react and they react, and at the end, you've all had a good time and you've all gotten to contribute to what's happening. This is one of the things that I talk about when I say if you let them, the players will do about 90% of the work for you. These are things like, you know, they decide where to go next. You're like, okay, this is what's at that place. They decide what to do with the information that you've given them. They go to another place and you say, this is what's at that place. And while they're doing all this stuff, in the background, you should be moving the pieces of the story. Like, what is the villain doing in response to what they're deciding to do? You know, what is the villain's timeline? Where are they showing up places? And if those places intersect, how does that change what you have planned? You know, it is... Yeah, and that's the kind of railroading that you want to avoid, is not allowing their actions, not allowing their opinions to flow through. You also really want to avoid, especially in flavor text, saying anything like, your character goes here and does this, or your character feels this. You know, it's not our job to dictate how they feel. We present a situation, and then the players decide, this is how my character feels about this. So, you know, saying things like, and the terror shivered you to your core, and you feel, and you're frozen in place as the monster moves across the path. If there's not a mechanic for enforcing that to happen, such as like a sanity check in Call of Cthulhu or an alienation check in Cthulhu Awakens, don't do that. You know, your players will have their reaction in mind about how they feel about what is happening. Yeah, it's a good topic, though. It's a great topic, and I think it's important as a game master to help avoid these things. You want to look into asking a lot of probing questions before they start their adventure, and even before you start running the campaign together. At session 0, you should be asking questions about what your players want to accomplish, what's their ideal situation, and breaking that scenario into smaller items that give you dials to play with and areas to put in obstacles. When the players, and this is from a campaign perspective, this is from an adventure perspective, this is from an encounter perspective. You want to know, what do my players, if they're going to approach a castle, how do they approach? How do you approach? What is your intent, and what do you want to happen or not happen on the way there? And then have the player answer with, oh, okay, our goal as a group is to sneak up to the walls of the castle without alerting any of the, oh, hey, Jay Gray, good to see you. I'm hopping in to say hello. I'm not at home, so I can't stay and watch / interact. Well, it is good to see you regardless. But yeah, you ask the players, you want to approach this castle. How do you want to accomplish that? And they say, we'd like to sneak there. We would like to avoid scrutiny from the guards. And if we can, we'd like to find a way in that's not the front entrance. So those are the things that they want to accomplish. And those are the places that you can start to put in obstacles organic to that task. I picked this up from Wargaming, is playing to intention. And I think that it does all of us a lot of good if we specify, this is what I want to do. This is my intended move up to what we're doing. I want to stand next to the objective, out of line of sight of you, so you can't shoot me back. So that even if you misplay and you put your figure just a little bit out of the way, the other person knows that was actually your intention. So I'm going to honor that perspective. The other thing that you can do to help avoid some of the sandboxing is to, instead of preparing necessarily an encounter, you want to prepare a difficulty. Instead of planning out a combat encounter with a group of PL5 robots, and 3 of them are X, Y, and Z, and 3 of them are X, Y, and Z, and one of them is, a leader type character. Just narrow it down to, I have a combat encounter that involves 6 minions. Those minions are PL4, and they have XYZ, close attack, range attack, all that stuff. And then there is a boss of some description. That way, you can take whatever you've prepped from a stat perspective, and you can color it however you'd like. Systems like Mutants and Masterminds are great at this, because you just have to worry about the numbers and the effects, and then when you get into the weeds, you can say that damage effect is actually a ray gun, or that damage effect is a ninja sword, or that damage effect is a marshmallow launcher. Whatever the players run into through the natural consequences of their exploration. Temporary says, which tabletop role-playing games do you know that don't need railroading or don't have the potential for it? I think most of them have the potential for it, but there are some that are much less likely to run into it. Things like Paranoia, you're much less likely to run into railroading, because at that point, everybody is really helping direct what's happening. And the player, that's really just, you sit back and let the players watch what they're doing and then sort of just jump in to adjudicate here and there. Fate, I find, is very good at avoiding railroading through the use of the creation of aspects. Basically, anybody can create an aspect to a scene if they roll correctly. So the players can take out an index card and they can write down, and then this is in the environment, and that gets added in, and anybody can tap that benefit. So I think Fate is really good at avoiding things like that. Again, anything powered by the Apocalypse is very good at rolling with the punches, because it's such a simple game from a mechanics point of view. Any game where the mechanics are less complicated, you will have an easier time improvising consequences to the player's actions, because you can prepare very generic difficulties and very generic encounters and then fill in the specifics once they get there. It's important as a game master to reward players for showing initiative and for doing the thing, because it's hard. Also any game really that is very interested in consequences from the players. Mutants and Masterminds, I think, does a pretty good job of avoiding railroading, because at the end of the day, when you're making a supervillain, especially minions, all you really need is a power level, and then you can flavor them however you want. All you really need, and you have the hero point as a backup option that both allows you to cause things to happen with a reward and allows the players to impact the scene in their own way through the use of like instant counter or edit the scene, those different benefits of the hero point that make it such a very useful currency for players. I'd say Savage Worlds also has a pretty good potential to avoid railroading, specifically because the system is a lot easier and less granular. Any system where difficulty is important to player challenge, you're going to run into some trouble. Things like 5e, where a group of 4 player characters can face monsters of a certain challenge rating. And once you run into that challenge rating, if you're not good at creating and modifying stat blocks on the fly, you'll run into some trouble where I did this because your characters can take it, and I'm stuck with this monster. So if we go to this place or we go to this place, it's very likely that that's what you're going to encounter, because that's what I've determined you can deal with in this time. And that's what I've got prepared, especially any game that involves a lot of miniatures or uses a lot of battle maps or anything like that, where there are physical props that are here. There will be an inclination to use those things. There'll be an inclination to lean on the railroading to make sure that your prep is used. Hi, William Lang. Good to see you. We're talking about railroading and how it can be a good and a bad thing. And specifically, railroading can be a good thing because it ensures that everybody has a relatively satisfying time with the story. You know, as long as agency is respected, but it tells everybody, this is the story we're telling. Can we work inside those constraints? I think of it more like bumpers for bowling at that point instead of railroading, where it is assisting you as the game master in scoring at the end of the game. So looking at things like, especially with a one-shot or with a convention game, there is some buy-in on the player's part where they're like, okay, we have 4 hours to do this. This is the only time we're going to be with these characters, and this is the story I signed up to participate in based on the synopsis. I want to get involved. I want to do the thing. So I'm willing to be led a little bit through a linear path, for instance. And again, you know your table better than I do. Your players might enjoy a sense of railroading because they get a little overwhelmed when they run into too many options. They can suffer from analysis paralysis. So being able to say, okay, here are 2 options that you can choose from, instead of, here's what happens, do whatever you want. Sometimes that open freedom can be overwhelming for players. So it's about finding a happy balance. There's a medium. There is, just like any other tool in your toolbox, it is something you have access to accommodate your players having a good time. At the end of the day, that's what matters the most, is, are my players having fun? Am I having fun? Then it's important to know and to ask yourself, am I not having fun because my players aren't following the path that I anticipated? In which case, is this adventure something that you want to run as a role-playing adventure, or is it a story you're trying to tell? In which case, do you want to try out something like writing or drawing a comic book or something like that? That is a little bit less of a collaboration and a little bit more of you having this great idea for a story and wanting to see it play out. Yeah, and like William says, some players you have to lay out the options for, especially new players if they're just getting into it. Because a lot of people, especially new players, are coming from things like video games, where they're very specifically, the computer can only be programmed for so many computations, and they don't understand, as the game master, you can do whatever. So they have that sort of ingrained training where, okay, even in games with choices, I can take the stealth path or the loud path, but we're going to wind up in the same place. So giving them those options can help ease them into the experience of making decisive choices of their own. Gene Caron says, give each player their own specific challenge that will let them shine. Yeah, I think having a roster of encounters or challenges tied to specific types of characters does a lot of good for you to help improvise, especially if you run to the same people all the time. You know what their characters are capable of, and you can sort of prep some backup emergency encounters just in case they decide to zig when you thought they were going to zag. Having some technology challenges, some magic challenges, some fighting challenges, some persuasion / deception / face challenges just banked for a situation where the players decide to go to the Manor House instead of to Disney World or wherever they wind up. Yeah. And having some of that always available prep work will help you feel comfortable about improvising too, because you're like, okay, I planned this adventure, but my characters have gone somewhere else. I can input some of these backup encounters I have planned that are sort of scenario agnostic. So they don't have to have a lot of details, they don't have a lot of specifics. Like if it is a persuasion challenge, you could say, this is the type of person they need to persuade. These are their insight rolls, and then you can call them whatever you want when they arrive wherever they're going. And having some of these pre-built encounters to put in the way can eat up some time, so that potentially by the time they get to the place that they are going, you might be able to do like an encounter there, and then that's the session for the week, and that buys you time to do the prep work for the place they've wound up. A lot of gaming is going to happen in bursts of prepared work, and then the transition work, that is where the railroading is going to happen. So that is where you run into any time that the players are transitioning from one adventure to the next, or transitioning from one location to the next. That's where the tendency to wander off happens the most. So having things to put in those transition zones to reward their decisions and to challenge their decisions will make it feel like you're not railroading them, even if you're just buying time to get to the end of what's happening so you can prepare for the next adventure the next week. And I say this all the time, but never be afraid to take a bathroom break if your players make a decision that you're like, I don't know what the hell is going to happen now. Saying, hey, I think it's a good time to refill our snacks and get some water, and I'm going to go to the bathroom real quick. Go in the bathroom, close the door, and have a panic attack. It's fine. I won't tell. But it's a good idea, to go in there where it's, where you're by yourself and you have a chance to think, okay, this is what I had planned. These are the things that I've got available. Can I use any of these things in the place that they're going to go? Not in a quantum ogre sort of way, but in a, if my initial adventure was for a haunted house and they've decided instead to go to a dungeon, are there any encounters I can pull out of the haunted house and move into the dungeon to get, or are there anything I could take and put in the path to the dungeon to get in their way to buy myself some time? Lots of improv rules apply to game mastering, saying yes and or no but. No is the ultimate shutdown. It is the ultimate thing that makes players feel like they are being forced into something they don't want to participate in. But a no but acknowledges, hey, you've made this request. I've acknowledged this request. That's not really how it's going to work, but here's an alternate path that's similar to what you've proposed, so that they know that you've taken their contribution in and you've thought about it and you've moved it into something that can be both of your collaboration. Or them saying something ridiculous and you being like, yes, that's how it works, and also this thing. It is the shutdown. That is when players get frustrated. Looking into the player says, I have this idea, and you say no. For instance, I've run into this as a player before, where I was a character who was a science fiction author, and the GM asked me if I would make a science check on something. I wasn't trained in science because I was a writer, and I was like, well, would it be possible for me to make an expertise science fiction check on this with a higher DC to see if maybe in my hours of research as an author, if I've read about this topic or read about anything like this. And he just said no and moved on to the next person. Which, that sucks, because I thought it was a great idea. And the other players at the table thought it was a great idea. Duke says, taking the thinker pose for great effect. Yes. Yeah, always remember that your face isn't on mute. So, yeah, don't let them see you sweat. And again, another piece of just general GM advice I give a lot of people is never apologize before performance, because they don't know that there's a script. They don't know, as long as you don't panic, they will think that you had this planned all along and you're the mastermind, right? That's one of the benefits to GM being such a mysterious role to a lot of players. And it's one of the things I'm trying to cut through, because GMing is, at the end of the day, a much easier skill than it appears to be at first. Wing says, I've learned to have multiple storylines available depending on when the players are at. You can always recycle plot lines later. Yes. Duke says, nothing prepared is ever wasted. That's correct. You can always take that prep work that you did for the location they decided not to go to, and you can just tweak it a little bit, and you can move it somewhere else in the story. You've done that prep work, and you've also learned through the doing of that prep work things like encounter design basics, all that fun stuff. Here's a bit. The PCs will probably miss the first clue, ignore the second, and misinterpret the third before making some incredible leap of logic that gets to where you wanted them to go all along. That's true. That's very true. We had an episode most recently about how to write investigations for role-playing games, and that is the ultimate example of what I call avoiding a load-bearing clue. Your mystery should never be centered on one specific thing being found out, or one specific puzzle being solved, or one specific question being asked. Any of that load-bearing things will kill the pacing of your adventure, and it will also punish player agency, because maybe they didn't decide to go to that place, or maybe they didn't decide to look in that desk, or maybe they didn't roll well enough to get the information you wanted them to, and then the adventure stalls out, and you're all sitting there looking at each other like, well, now what? And on the flip side, they might come to a completely different conclusion than you did with the clues, with the evidence you presented in front of them, and be willing to entertain that as a possibility, or watch their wheel spin. Let them think, let them debate, let them talk, and at the end of the day, they will probably come up with something that is either awesome or is the correct answer. And either way, go with it. Nothing is as important as everybody else having a good time. As the Pittsburgh Gaming Expo says, don't let mechanics get in the way of the fun. Definitely. Duke says, the new name for the show, How the GM Sausage is Made. Well, that's how we do things around here. And the demystification of the GM role. Clap, clap. Yes. Yeah, it's not as hard as it looks. I know a lot of people have, a lot of people get into the weeds of this is how it should be. There's a lot of this is how you should do it. But at the end of the day, there's no right way to be a game master, because I don't know who you're running your games for. Your players, your players better than anybody does, and you know how they want to have fun. You know what they want to get out of the game. So if they are new and they need a railroad conductor, do that for them. If they want to play in a sandbox and you're comfortable with that, do that for them. Be open, be willing, and be perceptive. Communication at the end of the day is the most important thing. And let them know that you are a safe place to come and give feedback to, or to ask a question. So if they say, hey, I felt like my agency was stepped on a little bit there, or I felt like my decision wasn't heard, can you let me know what was that about? Why did that happen that way? And be open with them. Just say, I have a plan for the long-term game that relies on you guys finding this information or going to this place. Or, I see that you made that decision. The other players really wanted to go the other way, and I had to make a decision between all of us, or the majority of us, going ahead and having a good time, or the few of us. And at the end of the day, I'm going to choose the decision that makes the most fun for the most people. Hopefully, the decisions I make sure everybody's having a good time, but sometimes a player will show up who is trying to, steal everybody else's thunder and to direct everybody else. And it's up to you to sort of bump up against them and be willing to be a little obstinate, to be a little, to say, that's a great idea. What does everybody else think? Or, you're the only person who seems to want to do that, and we're playing a group game, so it would be great if you would all stick together. That I think that's one of the big reasons the don't split the party advice has come up, is because we don't want to do the thing. I've tried to get people into GMing, says William Ling, but it's harder with the ampersand players for some reason. Yeah, and I think that's because 5e is one of those games that requires a lot of prep work on the GM's part, because of how quickly things can spiral out of control and how quickly all the players can die. And that's the end of the story. It's a much more dangerous game than a lot of other RPGs are, but it's also a lot of people's first or only game. So that's where they pick up their instincts. That's where they pick up their idea of how a game should be. That was actually a big part of my Gen Con games this year. Was I gave time at the beginning of my explanation for Mutants and Masterminds to say, I want you to try and put away some of your conceptions about role-playing games based on 5e. This is a game where you are all awesome. You are incredibly powerful superheroes. You're going to be able to do things that a 20th level D&D character wishes they could. Some of you will be able to walk through walls at will and throw fireballs and shoot lasers out of your eyes and pick up 400,000 tons, and it's not a big deal, because that's not the kind of game we're playing, where that is a big deal. We're telling a superhero story, which is inherently different than a dungeon crawl, or inherently different than a gothic horror survival game. We are telling a narrative, an exciting, high-action game story. So don't feel like you have to all stick together at the same time. Don't feel like, you're going to be in a lot of trouble if you run into a big group of villains, or, don't feel like you're going to, and also don't feel like death is the end, especially in a superhero game. And don't feel like any time you fail will result in your character's death. More than anything, in an M&M game, if the players are defeated by a villain, I will have them be captured or be embarrassed and left unconscious as the villain gets away with their goal. Because most of the time, villains aren't actually trying to kill the heroes. Yeah, I mentioned this on M&M Monday yesterday, but I had Dr. Doom one-shot the guy playing Ghost Rider, which was rough for him. But I knew that there were characters on the team who could heal, so I wasn't as worried about doing that. Yeah, William says a lot of the problems I run into, D&D players tend to be more kill everything before it kills us mentality. Yeah, I think that, and that adversarial position between the GM and the players, that is a hard nut to crack. Because in a lot of games, and even in a lot of D&D games, the DM is not out to get you. We're here to help tell a good story, and we're here to provide a challenge, but at the end of the day, I want to see you all win. If I wanted to kill your characters, all your characters have a heart attack. That's the end of the game. Bye. I'm going home. Squire missed the vid. I'm sorry, Squire. I hope you're having a great day, though. And the VOD will be up here in a couple minutes. So, I think I have rambled on about railroading enough for today, just to give a high overview of the topic and to give you guys some advice about how to avoid sort of that bad feels railroading. There's some good railroading. There is, I presented a scenario. Please go with me on this. Or we're in a constrained time slot, or you're in a bottle and there are only so many places that we can go. Can we please work together to make sure this does its thing? Tempo says, Call of Cthulhu is more like investigate and then run from the various Cthulhu horrors. Yeah. And I think having a conversation about the basic fantasy of whatever game we're playing up front does a great deal to help ease people's minds. You know, telling people, okay, we're playing a horror investigation game where you guys don't really have the ability to fight back. So if you run into trouble, running away is the best option most of the time. Or we're playing a superhero game where you are incredibly powerful, but there will be times that superhero genre conventions happen. So be willing to tell a superhero story. Or we're playing D&D, and the goal of this is to do a gritty, hex crawl dungeon dive. Like, we're going to go 5 foot by 5 foot. You guys will have your 10-foot poles, and if you fail any trap check, you'll die. Like that, give them that knowledge. That's what's happening. Communication at the end of the day. I hate that most of my videos boil down to talk to your players, but that is what you need to do, is to have that conversation with them, to set expectations, and to be open to having that dialogue with them, because you're all here, you're all friends, you're all trying to have a good time. That's the most important thing. Yeah, so railroading ideas. Be willing to bend your ideas to follow along with what the players are doing. Make sure when you're designing your encounters, especially in transition zones between big adventure points, make sure to design difficulties and design stats, but not necessarily design flavor. That way, wherever they go, you can drop in an encounter that can make sense where they are, so it doesn't feel like a quantum ogre situation where they're going to run into an ogre wherever they go. Make sure to have a sort of backlog of prepared encounters that are tailored to your group and can be dropped into various different locations. That way, you can make sure that there's something to do during game night if they decide that they're not going to go the direction that you've prepared and you're not good at improvising, so that they have something they can run into, and you can buy yourself time to do the prep work for where they're going to wind up. Tempo mentions, not to mention combat and RuneQuest and Pendragon is usually more lethal compared to D&D and Pathfinder. Yeah, lots of and that's part of the fantasy of that game. I played Zweihander, which was crazy. I had a great time playing Zweihander, but it was definitely a different. It was different storytelling instincts than I usually have. So that took me a minute to acclimate to. Even as a player, where you're making decisions based on what you think the game is. And that's the other way to help avoid railroading. As players, give your GM grace and understand the nature of what you're trying to accomplish during a particular session, whether it's a one-shot, an ongoing campaign, a season finale for people who run seasons of their games. Know the nature of what's going on and be willing to bend towards those things while acknowledging that what you do in game does matter. Yeah. Okay, as for news about me, as we're sort of winding down here, Thursday, I believe we have an episode of Thursday here on Green Running's YouTube channel. I don't know what we'll be talking about, but Troy, I'm sure we'll have something exciting to talk about. Next Monday is the planning episode for Mutants and Masterminds Monday, where we will be coming up with our topics for the next few months. So if you have a good topic for a superhero game, please pop over on Monday to drop off whatever you want to talk about. And Steve and I will come up with something, I'm sure. Tonight I will be participating in the season finale of our dark superhero game, Something in the Dark, over at twitch.tv/Untold Stories Project at 7 p.m. EST, so about an hour from now. With that, I say thank you all very much. If you're here still at the end, please give us a like, comment on the YouTube video, tell your friends about us, and remember, at the end of the day, we are here to help you become a better game master, because there's nothing more important in the role-playing game industry than making more game masters. We provide the fun for everybody, and it's very important what you do, and I want to be here to help any way that I can. So thank you again, everybody, and have a wonderful rest of your week.